back to Jimmy Cook, who is the we've we've talked with a bit earlier today, and I'm so glad you could make it back, and Zoom cooperated, and so yeah, Jimmy is the last working technician at VOA who worked directly with Willis, and so it's been wonderful to hear his memories of working directly with Willis, and also having that context of the institutional culture of the VOA.
Yes, thank you, Maricela. Wow, so many points come to mind. When I started working at VOA, it was in 1989. This was after working at NBC in New York for 14 years. But there were so many things that I discovered when I had internet access to find out things about Willis, and also to find out about the culture that existed at NBC at VOA before I started working there. I had a couple people who I could talk to who could describe the environment back in the 60s. And so I was kind of surprised because I hadn't thought about those things until I came across the earlier information about Willis, involved in the club scene in DC. And then it came to mind, even the physical structure of the building where VOA is based on a segregation premise. So I, along with some other people, ventured to guess which bathrooms were the segregated ones. And so that included all of these people from all over the world were not able to go into certain bathrooms. I mean, that is just so, it's insane, but that's the way it was until the 70s. I mean, so the first time I actually heard of Willis Conover's Jazz Hour, I was hired for a technician position in October of 1989, but I had a vacation that I normally would take at a timeshare that I had in Jamaica. So I had to tell them, look, I'll be back after I get back from Jamaica. And coming back on that flight, it was a United flight, I remember, and it was a direct flight from Montego Bay to Washington, D.C. And they had, I don't remember the movie that was playing, but I do remember that when I had the headphones after the movie, there was a selection switch on the seat, and it had things categorized, what kind of music you wanted to listen to, and I clicked the jazz selection, and it was Willis Conover's Jazz Hour. Now, I didn't know who Willis was at the time. I really didn't know anything about Willis, but I loved that program, and I loved the host, the way he introduced the music, and he always had something to say about the musicians. It was like he knew these people. It wasn't like he was, just flying blind. He knew exactly what to say about them that intrigued the listener. So that was in 1989, and I started working there, and I would occasionally hear guys talk about Willis. And apparently what would happen was there were guys who would be assigned to do his show while the regular guy, Efim Drucker, was out sick or, and they would go and do his show. And when they were done doing his show, they would come to the break room and just grumble about one thing after another, So I was kind of taken aback by that. But when they asked me if I would consider being his backup technician, I said, sure, I'd love to meet the guy, man. And that was the beginning of a beautiful relationship. And I discovered that, he liked to do things a certain way. And he always wanted to make sure that we cleaned the vinyl before playing any tracks. And I think he just avoided records that had too many ticks and pops. but he always found whatever he was planning to play in a particular show. Just incredible sensibility about doing a show, better than anyone else that I worked with at VOA. The guys would talk about him being outside smoking all the time. You know, that came to his peril. But I worked together with him, putting together these shows. And what would happen is, oftentimes before we actually got to do any work, we would be talking about different experiences that we had with people in the jazz world. I was fortunate enough to actually be in the band that opened for Dizzy Gillespie at the dedication of a street to him in Inglewood, New Jersey. And the reason was because the lawyer, who was a piano player that lived next door to Dizzy, we had mutual friends. And so the day that I went over to practice, Dizzy comes walking across his front lawn with a joint in his hand. And he comes in and asks everybody, "Hey, how y'all doing? Anybody want any?" And I was just really thrilled. And having worked at NBC, he came in to promote his book. So I saw Dizzy many times, you know, over the course of years. And so I sort of considered him to be my jazz father, because every time I saw him, he had some kind of musical theory idea that he was promoting or trying to share with people to help them to understand the details of how rhythm works and how, you know, how patterns are formed and how we can understand them by him doing these little illustrations, you know, showing how the beats go, you know. He was fascinating. But I had a chance to meet Joe Williams, the great blues singer. And he was a favorite of my mom, particularly. I sang in a club on the Upper West Side of Manhattan for 3.5 years, 3 times a week. Thursday would be a 8-hour night. You know, we start at 9 and get out at 2 or something like that. But or 7. That's right. We started at 7. And so this song became, you know, one of my best songs in terms of the audience response. And sometimes they would ask me to play it again before the night was over. And I sang the song. If you're not familiar with it, it goes, every day I have the blues. Every day I have the blues. Well, if you see me worried, baby, it's 'cause it's you I hate to lose. The next line is the line that got me. Nobody loves me. Nobody seems to care. Nobody loves me. Nobody seems to care. Between bad luck and trouble, well, you know I've had my share. Having sung that song, you know, when you're singing that much in a week or over a course of a number of years, you find that certain nights you're in different moods. And so songs kind of creep up on you in ways that you don't expect. But with this song, every time I sang that line, nobody loves me, nobody seems to care, it hit me like a ton of bricks. How anyone could feel that distanced, you know, from love. So I found out that Joe Williams was being interviewed by Willis, and I went in to the studio, and at the end of the recording, I asked Willis if I could ask Mr. Williams a question. And the question was that line, nobody loves me, nobody seems to care. Was that autobiographical, or did you write that as a way to give the song more credibility? And he insisted, no, it was autobiographical. And he went on to tell me how difficult it was for him at the start of his career because his parents didn't want him to go out on the road. And the thing is that he was making a lot of money at that time. And he said that he could make more money on a weekend than his parents could make in a month. And yet they didn't want him to go on the road to do the one thing that he loved to do the most. And so he was definitely negatively impacted by that situation. The thing that also struck me while I was asking this question is, I was checking with Willis to make sure that I wasn't crossing any boundaries or, stepping out of line. And he looked up and gave me affirmation. The affirmation looked like, it's okay, go ahead. And so we had a wonderful time after that. In fact, Joe Williams even signed the last Mother's Day card that my mom ever received. I had gotten it for myself, but I said, here, will you sign this? And he signed it for my mom. And she really was surprised. Yeah. And of course, she passed away that following October. But the experiences that Willis ushered into my life changed my life in a very fundamental way. And it became even more powerful when at his memorial service, I met his younger brother, Walter, who came to me and told me that he really was sorry that he wasn't able to spend as much time with his brother as he wanted to, and that his parents had actually disowned him for associating with Black musicians. And I'll be honest with you, I was stunned at first. In retrospect, I'm asking myself, they shunned him for associating with Duke Ellington? They shunned him for associating with Louis Armstrong? They shunned him for being friends with Sarah Vaughan? It was just something that was very devastating to try and get a comprehension of how they could do that to him when he's associating with the best minds in our culture. So I also discovered then, again, coming across the internet, that he is credited with singularly desegregating the jazz scene, the jazz clubs in Washington, D.C. He would put together, he would produce concerts at clubs and at other venues, and would intentionally mix the group so that the club owners would get used to seeing that and not be so shocked. The idea that he was able to pull all of this off without ever being arrested is still a mystery to me. But he was able to do that, like the story of Billie Holiday wanting to see Art Tatum. He did this very quietly and allowed her to attend this concert. He walked in with her through the kitchen entrance, and he sat there with her the whole time. So Willis was a very unique individual. He had a lot of class. He had a lot of class, and he had a lot of empathy for people. It's just amazing to me, the stories of so many successful musicians who talk about how their encounters with Willis was what really gave them the momentum to continue on to these fabulous careers. And so I attribute some of that to the fact that he was separated from his family, and he must have felt in those early years that he was out there on his own. And he must have also, all of those people that he introduced at the Newport Jazz Festival, if you look up the Newport Jazz Festival in Wikipedia, there's a tab that you can or a link that you can find of the posters from the Newport Jazz Festivals. I would say look for the one starting in 1955 or 56. And attached to those posters are the programs. And you'll see Willis's name listed there. But to see the names of all of the artists that he introduced is really overwhelming because, number one, they're artists whose names you don't see anywhere anymore. You know, like Jack Teagarden, there are just so many. The sidemen to Louis Armstrong, and all of the other sort of lesser known jazz groups that were popular at that time. To see him there with all of those names, you know he must have gotten acquainted with a lot of them. And so that's really, here's the problem though. People younger than us will have a problem with that because they had no idea who these people are. But I remember Duke Ellington and Louis Armstrong from the 50s. I remember seeing Dizzy Gillespie on the Ed Sullivan Show, and it must have been like 1956 or 1957. You know, it was one of those things where we got on the phone and we told everybody that Dizzy Gillespie was on television. It was such a magnificent event. I noticed also that Paul Desmond was playing an allusion to Manteca, which was a very big Cuban jazz hit back in the early 50s. The reason why I remember that song is because I had older brothers who were like 10 years older than me, and they borrowed a wind-up recorder, a phonograph player, and they had to go and buy a 45 to put in there to play it because our cousins wouldn't let him have the 45s that they had. And what he found at the record store was Dizzy Gillespie's Manteca. And man, I just loved it. I love listening to it, and I love watching my brother act like he was conducting an orchestra when it was on. It was just a wonderful time from that perspective. And like I said, I met Dizzy several times after that. It's one of those things I never expected to happen, to meet Dizzy Gillespie. So the whole idea of this 100th anniversary came about quite ironically when my youngest sister, who's a professor of philosophy, joined a group called Jazz and the Spirit of Democracy. And the keyboard player for the group was Larry Willis, who was with Miles Davis for a while, and most notably with Blood, Sweat, and Tears for many, many years. He was the keyboard player. Paul Murphy, who was a drummer with Cecil Taylor, was the drummer. And his wife, Yeri, who's a poet, wrote spoken word for some of the music that they had composed to illustrate the spirit of democracy in jazz. So there were very long improvisational sections to what they did. There was also another drummer who was one of Paul Murphy's proteges. His name is Dominic Frager. And the thing that's really unique about Dominic is he also plays guitar. And he and Paul are doing guitar and drum music to this day. And unfortunately, Larry Willis passed away in 2019. But as I mentioned before, Larry Willis told me the story of when he met Duke Ellington and how starstruck he was and how Duke kissed him on both cheeks twice and said one for each cheek, which was really quite amazing. Larry Willis's birthday is on December 20th, which at the time, in some internet circles, they had that listed as Willis Conover's birthday. But we had some fun with that. He really wanted to play for this for the centennial event that Voice of America was planning at the time, but unfortunately, he passed away. So I mentioned the idea of having a concert when this actually started. And I mentioned it to Wynton Marsalis at a Christmas program that he did at Strathmore here in Maryland. And he said he thought it was a great idea. I gave him a copy of the Ripmaster book so that he could read up on it. And he told me, he said, the only thing is he would do it if we could get Igor Boutman, his best friend, to join him in the performance. And man, I was working on the details of that event all the way up to the COVID moment. And in fact, back in February, Wynton had a program that he performed the same weekend that the Moscow Jazz Orchestra was performing at the Blue Note in New York City. So I went up and I met both of them and talked to them. They both explained to me how they work when they work together, who has the piano player and who has the bass player and who brings the drummer. All of those details we were putting in place. But that same weekend, it was the first week of February. And that weekend after that, the COVID things started to emerge. And so that's really shut a lot of things down, not just the club scene, but my ability to communicate to a lot of people who on the job and to communicate with the third floor. That was a very strange situation. And I think we all have to remember when somebody reaches their centennial birthday, a lot of people have gone. A lot of people who could have made this a lot easier and even a bigger splash, they're all gone. I worked for 10 years with Leonard Garment's oldest brother, Charlie. And so if Leonard Garment was around today, this would be a Kennedy Center event. You know, I'm certain. But Leonard is gone. George Avakian at CBS Records at the time. When Willis passed away, it became imminent that there was a possibility that there would be no jazz on Voice of America. And George Avakian was one of the people who asked me to call him to see what he could do to help make sure that that doesn't happen. I actually met with Congressman Conyers, who initiated H.R. 57, recognizing jazz as America's original art form. He's gone. But I know he would have loved to have been a part of a celebration of Willis's centennial. So that is one of the most daunting things, coming to realize that Willis never received the Jazz Masters award from the NEA, when, from what I understand, he was influential in getting jazz recognized by the NEA and supported by the NEA to the NEA's benefit. I mean, to think about all of the recipients of the NEA Jazz Masters Award since Willis started consulting with the NEA is just astounding. And to see that he never received one, I don't understand how it could get to this point. But anyway, we're going to try and do that and get it done. Also, if we get a new CEO of USGAM, that's one of the issues that I will bring before him, getting a stamp for Willis Conover's centennial, hopefully commemorated on Willis Conover Day in April 25th. Likewise, a Grammy. He he deserves a Grammy for all of the Grammy winners that he essentially created. But people have said because he's not a musician, he didn't receive the recognition that he deserved. And the thing is that the only way to really describe the way Willis worked and the kind of research and background information that he put into his shows is nothing short of what a musician does to prepare to go out on the road and support a particular release. It's a lot of detail, it's a lot of discipline, and it's a lot of work that he put into this that he didn't have to. But yet that's the kind of person he is. He wanted to be thorough and he wanted to be effective. And so he's basically teaching a jazz class with all of his shows. I would dare say that if we were to get all of the Jazz Hour shows together and put them together, it would be enough material to get a master's degree in jazz. And yet, I think because, again, of the age that we live in, fewer people who heard him at the height of his career makes it difficult for people to understand how important he was to the music and to the culture of other countries. So many people out here, you've heard the stories today of all the jazz artists overseas who ascribe their ability to play jazz to Willis Conover. He deserves more recognition than he was able to receive when he was alive, mainly because so many of his broadcasts weren't heard here in the United States. So we owe him big time. We owe him. Well, thank you, Maristella, for inviting me to be a part of this. I look forward to even more events in the future to this great master of a man and an absolutely wonderful friend to me and to so many people around the world. Thank you.
Awesome, and yeah, and thank you for all of your insights and memories that you've shared today, and also for your continuing advocacy for Conover within the VOA.
Yes.
Yeah, are there questions for Jimi?
I think it's getting kind of late. People want to go and have a drink.
yeah. It's only 3:30 here, but it's like they say, it's
That's
5
right.
o'clock somewhere.
Yeah, almost coming up on 5 o'clock.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and yeah.
I just, it's just so amazing. With all of the time that we've spent, there's still things that haven't been said about Willis.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it'll always be that way. It will always be that way. There will always be things that are very important that we can't all fit into any amount of time less than his lifetime.
Oh yeah.
It would take us 100 years to cover it all, it seems, What a wonderful man.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and yeah, any final thoughts from any of our other presenters? The variety of what we've heard today has been really wonderful, because there are so many facets to who Willis Conover was, and so it's been nice to hear so many of those.
If you have the time, hold on a minute. I went out and purchased this book on Ruth Brown.
Oh yeah.
It's an amazing book. She's a great storyteller, and her recollection of the night that Willis and Duke Ellington were there when she basically got the big start of her career, it's really a great story. I had a chance to meet her, and when I met her, it was because I was working at NBC with a newscaster named Sue Simmons. Some of you may be familiar with Sue Simmons. Sue Simmons' father was John Simmons, the bass player. And he had worked with Ruth Brown quite a bit. And so Ruth Brown and Sue were good friends. So it was really a pleasure meeting her. She's a funny, funny individual, really very pleasant person to be around when she was here. And the book really carries that spirit quite well. I also got my signed copy of To Be or Not to Bop. It took me a while to read this because I enjoyed it so much I didn't want to finish it.
Yeah.
It took me like several months to get through the last chapter. I just waited until I went to Jamaica and on the beach, I finished reading this fantastic book. Still amazing how much information in here that's still relevant to today, and certainly relevant to understanding, the jazz ambassadors and that whole realm of music in the 50s. But a great book. It also tells the stories of other great artists, like Elvin Jones's brother, Hank Jones. And it tells the story of how Ella Fitzgerald met her husband, the bass player, and how you find all of these sort of intricate relationships between so many other musicians with this book. And it's one of these things, we see these artists and we sort of see them, in their solo environment, but we don't see what goes on in the background and how they're associated one with the other. And he reveals a lot of that in this book, To Be or Not to Bop. Dizzy Gillespie, one of my jazz fathers. I used to see him so much. In fact, when I first moved to New York, the first concert I went to was a thing called Jazzmobile. I don't know if you ever heard about it, but it was a big vehicle that was a stage. This big vehicle would have the side of the door, it's like those beer trucks. The door would slide up and they would have everything there, sound system, microphones, and the drums would be set up and everything. And they would do a series of these throughout the summer. And the first one that I went to was Dizzy Gillespie. Blew my mind, absolutely blew my mind. And they did it at Grant's Tomb because they have the room there to host events. But so I used to see Dizzy quite a bit when I was in New York. Wonderful guy. And his wife, Lorraine, just as sweet as she could be. They were like grandparents that you might not have had. Certainly not in the jazz world, but, because my mom really loved jazz. My dad wasn't a big fan of jazz. So I had these jazz fathers who informed me about what the scene was like when jazz was really the big hit of music that it was for at least 40, 50 years from the 20s. So I really had a wonderful experience, and Willis was a big part of that. Mm-hmm.
Cool. Yeah, thanks so much to everybody. Thanks to our wonderful tech team, Joshua Sylvie and Sarah Alsop, who've been all day. They're the ones that made it a Zoom presentation. Without them, I would be presenting to my cat. And and so thanks to our library external relations people, and thanks again to Dan Morgenstern, Adam Clayton Powell III, and of course Ricky, Carol, Keith, Jimmy, for just a wonderful day. You know, this is even on the data side, our job is about is about making connections, and so you know to be able to have such a wonderful slate of guests and make these connections, it has been an absolute joy. And you know, for me, it's like being an astronaut and in the Super Bowl all at once. It's just this has been, you know, Christmas come early.